It was a crisp morning in Washington, D.C. The Capitol dome gleamed in the rising sun, standing tall as a symbol of America's enduring resilience. But within its walls, tensions were at an all-time high. Whispers had been circulating for weeks, but now it was official. Senator Bernie Sanders, the longtime progressive voice from Vermont, had drafted a formal motion to impeach President Donald J. Trump, who had recently returned to the Oval Office after a stunning political comeback. Sanders, a firebrand with decades of political capital, had chosen to go all in. Standing before a crowd of flashing cameras and murmuring journalists on Capitol Hill, he gripped the microphone with both hands. "No one, not even a president, is above the law," Sanders declared. "This administration has run roughshod over working families while rewarding the billionaire class. I cannot, in good conscience, sit idly by while democracy is threatened. Therefore, I have filed articles of impeachment against Donald J. Trump." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The announcement was seismic. Inside the White House, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was already preparing a fierce rebuttal. She stormed into the West Wing briefing room with a sense of defiant composure, prepared to strike back. "This is yet another baseless, politically motivated stunt by the radical left," she told the press. "Senator Sanders has shown he is not interested in serving the American people, but rather obsessed with removing a duly elected president. Twice." The media lapped it up. CNN hailed Sanders' courage. MSNBC labeled the move historic. Meanwhile, Fox News erupted with fury, branding it the second coming of the Russiagate circus. But no one, not even Sanders himself, was prepared for what would happen next. Behind the scenes, Trump was not panicking. In fact, he was smiling. In a private meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance, Attorney General Pam Bondi, and strategic advisor Elon Musk, Trump reviewed the impeachment filing with bemused indifference. "They never learn," Trump chuckled. "They impeached me once and I still came back. Bernie thinks he can stop what's coming? He's waking up a beast." J.D. Vance leaned in, his voice calm but cold. "Let him proceed. It'll backfire. We're ready." And ready they were. Unbeknownst to Sanders, the White House had already obtained documentation that would turn the tables. Files exposing backdoor dealings and inconsistencies in Sanders' alliances with far-left PACs that could prove to be politically damaging, if not outright illegal. All it would take was a spark. That spark came the very next morning, on the Senate floor, just minutes after Sanders formally submitted the impeachment resolution. Republican Senator Josh Hawley stood up with a thick binder in his hand and an explosive grin on his face. "Before this body accepts any debate on the absurd charges brought by the senator from Vermont," Hawley said, "I'd like to submit for the record these documents outlining potential ethical violations from the senator himself. If we're going to talk about impeachment, let's start with honesty." The chamber erupted in stunned murmurs. Sanders was visibly shaken. His hands trembled as he flipped through the papers that had just been handed to him by a staffer. Screenshots, transaction logs, PAC contributions from organizations tied to controversial overseas interests. He hadn't even made it through the first page before realizing he had walked right into a trap. But this was only the beginning. The backlash was just warming up. Senator Bernie Sanders sat frozen in his seat. The impeachment documents he had so proudly introduced mere moments ago were now completely overshadowed by the bombshell Hawley had dropped. Across the aisle, GOP senators began whispering to each other, some laughing quietly while others wore grim, determined looks. The battle lines had been drawn, and Sanders had made the first move. But President Trump was already 10 steps ahead. Within an hour, the story exploded across the airwaves. Fox News was already running with a headline that read, "Sanders' Dirty Secrets? Leaked docs reveal shadowy PAC ties." Meanwhile, Newsmax had Trump supporters on air, applauding the president's restraint in the face of what they called a second witch hunt. But the real blow came later that day, when Trump held a surprise press conference in the East Room of the White House. Wearing his signature red tie and flanked by J.D. Vance and Caroline Leavitt, Trump addressed the nation in what some would later call his most devastating counterattack yet. "I was elected by the people of this great nation to restore strength, stability, and prosperity. And what do the radical Democrats do? They try to impeach me. for doing my job. Bernie Sanders doesn't want justice. He wants attention. But now he's got the wrong kind of attention. Then Trump did something few expected. He turned the podium over to Attorney General Pam Bondi, who proceeded to outline a preliminary investigation into what she called potential campaign finance manipulation by Sanders' former presidential campaign and his ongoing relationships with far-left activist groups. "Let me be clear," Bondi said, her voice cutting through the silence. "No one is above the law. We are looking into every transaction, every donor, every foreign influence that may have found its way into Senator Sanders' political machinery." Suddenly, the headlines shifted. MSNBC, which had just hours ago praised Sanders for standing tall, now ran cautious segments titled "Campaign Ethics Questions Arise for Sanders Amid Impeachment Push." Even CNN had no choice but to report on the documents presented by Hawley, noting that they hadn't been independently verified yet, but were enough to open a Senate Ethics Committee review. And while the media scrambled to realign, social media caught fire. On X, formerly Twitter, Elon Musk posted a meme of Bernie Sanders sinking in a swamp with the caption, "You come at the king, you best not miss." The White House communications team leaned into the chaos. Caroline Leavitt launched a rapid response campaign online, turning Sanders' impeachment attempt into a fundraising bonanza for Trump's re-election war chest. "Bernie tried to cancel your president. Now let's cancel his political career." Read a donation email that raked in $10 million in less than 24 hours. Back on Capitol Hill, the Democrats were in disarray. Senator Joe Manchin, a centrist Democrat, was the first to speak out. "I didn't sign up for this circus. I'm not backing any impeachment push until we get real facts, not partisan stunts." Even some of Sanders' allies, like Representative Ilhan Omar and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, were noticeably silent. By nightfall, Bernie's expression had changed. He looked tired, alone, and cornered. But Donald Trump? He was on fire. That evening, during a Fox News primetime interview with Tucker Carlson, Trump didn't just gloat. He announced a new executive initiative that caught America by storm. "While the Democrats waste their time with witch hunts, I'm launching the American Family Rebate Plan. $500 back into the hands of every working family this year." It was bold. It was populist. And it obliterated Sanders' momentum. The question on everyone's mind now wasn't, will Trump be impeached? It was, will Bernie survive this politically? As the dust from Bernie Sanders' failed gambit settled over Capitol Hill, a far more powerful force began to take shape outside of Washington, the voice of the American people. Overnight, Trump's approval rating saw a 7-point bump, according to the latest Trafalgar Group poll. A significant majority of working-class voters, especially across Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, expressed outrage at what they perceived to be yet another pointless impeachment distraction by the left. "We voted for Trump because he does what he says," said Tara Brooks, a factory worker from Erie, Pennsylvania, in a viral TikTok video. "We're tired of politicians like Bernie wasting time and money on drama. Let the man lead." That sentiment echoed nationwide. Fox News town halls were jammed with calls from independent voters voicing frustration. Even many liberal-leaning moderates found themselves agreeing with Trump for the first time in years. Meanwhile, Sanders was in full damage control. He appeared on CNN with Anderson Cooper, trying to steer the narrative back toward policy. "Look, I don't regret holding the president accountable," Sanders insisted. "But I regret the distraction this has become. My intent was to bring light to the administration's actions, not to create a circus. But it was too late." That same evening, Trump appeared at a massive rally in Cincinnati, Ohio, before a crowd of 40,000 supporters. The energy was electric, flags waved like wildfire, and chants of "4 more years" roared through the air. Taking the stage to Lee Greenwood's "God Bless the USA," Trump turned the moment into a populist masterclass. "While Bernie and his gang are playing Washington games, we're fighting for you, the American worker, the forgotten men and women of this country. And I'm telling you right now, this impeachment stunt, it's over. And so is his career." The crowd exploded. Standing just off stage was Vice President J.D. Vance, nodding with that stoic calm that had become his signature. The young VP had already begun meeting with swing state governors, preparing for what now seemed inevitable. A Trump landslide in the 2026 midterms and a fortified Republican hold. In the backdrop, prominent Democrats were beginning to fracture. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer reportedly had a closed-door meeting with Sanders where tempers flared. Leaked audio later revealed Schumer yelling, "You just gave Trump a gift-wrapped second term." The mainstream media, caught between fact-checking and covering the fallout, tried to salvage Sanders' reputation by shifting focus to Trump's economic initiatives. But the public wasn't buying it. Trump's announcement of the American Family Rebate Plan hit home for millions. The Department of Treasury confirmed that payments would begin rolling out within weeks, a direct infusion of cash into households battered by years of inflation and uncertainty. Even Elon Musk, who had been serving as an unofficial tech and economic advisor, tweeted, "This is what happens when leadership focuses on solving problems instead of playing politics." Hashtag American Family Rebate. By now, even Democratic donors were starting to pull back. One prominent hedge fund executive told Politico anonymously, "If this is the kind of leadership we're fielding against Trump, we're screwed." Sanders, once hailed as a progressive lion, was now being quietly shunned by the very movement he had helped build. AOC and the squad had gone quiet. Progressive publications were beginning to question his judgment. "Has Bernie lost his touch?" read one brutal headline in The Nation. And then came the final straw. An internal DNC email, leaked by a whistleblower, revealed that the party leadership was strongly discouraging any support for renewed impeachment discussions going forward. The message was clear: this road leads nowhere. Focus on 2026, or we lose it all. As the walls closed in around Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump stood taller than ever, a political juggernaut reclaiming territory and hearts with each passing day. And the senator from Vermont? He wasn't just losing a battle, he was losing his legacy as the days wore on. Senator Bernie Sanders found himself in uncharted territory. Isolated, diminished, and under siege. A political career that had weathered decades of opposition, even a presidential primary defeat, was now being shredded by a tactical error that he himself had initiated. The final act of his impeachment campaign had backfired so catastrophically that it began unraveling the ideological coalition he had spent a lifetime building. In a dramatic twist, the Senate Ethics Committee, now with mounting pressure from the GOP and an energized public, formally opened an investigation into Sanders' campaign finance dealings, including an alleged funneling of funds through multiple progressive nonprofits with international ties. The hearings were scheduled for the following month, right in the heart of the 2026 midterm campaign cycle. Even more damaging, several top aides from Sanders' 2020 presidential run were subpoenaed, including his former communications director and finance chief. Though no formal charges were filed, the optics were lethal. Meanwhile, President Trump was riding high. His administration, sensing blood in the water, rolled out a series of bold legislative moves that effectively outflanked Democrats on their own issues. He signed an executive order expanding child tax credits, increased funding for veteran mental health services, and launched an inner-city economic zone initiative championed by J.D. Vance and Elon Musk. These moves didn't just fire up his base, they began to win over centrists, independents, and even some urban Democrats. Suddenly, it was the Trump administration that was talking about working families, equity, and American dignity, while Bernie Sanders was answering questions about foreign-linked campaign donations and his failed attempt to remove a sitting president. On Capitol Hill, whispers turned into cold shoulders. One by one, Sanders supporters began distancing themselves. AOC, once his most loyal ally, appeared on The View and refused to answer whether Sanders had made a mistake with his impeachment push. "Look, I respect Senator Sanders deeply," she said, eyes darting. "But I think right now the American people are focused on results, on their wallets, their jobs, and their children's future." The message was clear. Sanders had become politically toxic. Behind closed doors, DNC operatives began floating names to replace Sanders as a senior voice on the Budget Committee, a position he had long held with pride. Reports emerged that even Chuck Schumer had encouraged Bernie to quietly consider stepping back from leadership roles for the good of the party. But Sanders wasn't the only one feeling the heat. His impeachment blunder had triggered a domino effect within the progressive wing of the party. The New York Times published an exposé on the internal fracture between far-left Democrats and the moderates who blamed them for feeding Trump's resurgence. It was a cell phone of historic proportions, said one senior Democratic strategist anonymously. We handed Trump a political nuke and begged him to press the button. Meanwhile, Trump was wasting no time weaponizing the disaster. At a second mega rally in Phoenix, Arizona, the president doubled down. They tried to impeach me again. This time it wasn't just pathetic, it was suicidal. And guess what? Bernie Sanders is the one who's going to pay the price. The American people don't want phony crusaders. They want results. Then came the ultimate humiliation for Sanders. During a tense Senate session, a Republican-led resolution was introduced to formally censure him for wasting congressional resources and initiating a baseless impeachment effort for partisan gain. Shockingly, several Democrats abstained from voting and voted in favor. It passed. For a man once considered the conscience of the progressive movement, it was a breathtaking fall. The Senate censure stung more than Bernie Sanders ever anticipated. For a man who had always prided himself on principle, integrity, and being on the right side of history, this symbolic slap from both parties felt like a public execution of his political legacy. He walked out of the Senate chamber that day with his head lowered. Not from shame, but from disbelief. In Vermont, where Bernie had once been untouchable, the sentiment had shifted. The progressive grassroots energy that had once lifted him into the national spotlight was fracturing. College town halls were being canceled due to low attendance. His inbox was filled not with donations, but with angry emails from former supporters asking, "Why did you hand Trump a victory?" Even Vermont's local press, usually favorable to their senator, published blistering editorials titled, "Sanders lost the plot, Trump played chess while Bernie played checkers." The impeachment that made Trump stronger. Back in Washington, President Trump stood on the South Lawn of the White House giving what would later be dubbed the reaffirmation address, a moment so strategically timed that even critics admitted it was genius. With American flags waving behind him and blue-collar workers standing beside him, Trump declared, "This administration doesn't have time for political theater. We are rebuilding this country. Our jobs, our families, and our future." Bernie Sanders tried to divide this nation with a sham impeachment, and in the process, he united Americans under something far greater: truth, resilience, and progress. The crowd roared, but perhaps the most remarkable moment was yet to come. That evening, a bipartisan panel appeared on 60 Minutes to discuss the fallout. What was once unimaginable happened. Senator Kyrsten Sinema, former Democrat Tulsi Gabbard, and even moderate Democrat John Tester admitted the impeachment push had energized Trump's base and crippled progressive credibility. Sanders' mistake had become a case study in overreach. And then, just 2 weeks later, a letter was leaked from within Sanders' own team. It revealed that the senator was contemplating resignation after the Ethics Committee concluded its findings, which, while falling short of criminal wrongdoing, heavily criticized his judgment and political motives. As reporters swarmed his modest Vermont home, Bernie stood on the front porch one morning, flanked by his wife Jane. With weathered hands gripping the railing, he looked out to the press and delivered what many now believe was his political farewell. "I have served this country for nearly 5 decades. I've fought for the working class, for justice, for dignity. But I'm not immune to error. And yes, I overplayed my hand. My focus was on holding power accountable, but I lost sight of the people in the process. For that, I am truly sorry." It was perhaps the most human moment of Bernie Sanders' career. Though he did not resign on the spot, Sanders quietly withdrew from all major committee roles by the end of the month and announced he would not seek re-election in 2026. Across America, reactions were mixed. Some mourned the end of a revolutionary political era. Others breathed a sigh of relief. But the man most satisfied? Donald J. Trump. At a celebratory rally in Tampa, he delivered a mic drop moment to roaring applause. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just defeated impeachment again. And this time, we didn't just beat the left. We buried it." The Trump train surged forward into the 2026 midterms with unprecedented momentum, leaving behind a shattered opposition, a collapsed impeachment, and the political obituary of Bernie Sanders. Trying to end Donald Trump's presidency. Sanders had only strengthened it. And the regret would follow him forever.